Hey friends, this is Sunday Postscript for October the 29th. I'm Pastor Cary. This is the Growing in the Gospel YouTube channel. And I'm back from Greece and Turkey. We had a wonderful group that went for about a 10-day trip of Journeys of Paul, exploring biblical locations and biblical stories and teaching the Bible in those locations. It was a life-transforming journey. It will be with me for the rest of my life. I look forward to taking the trip again. And so those of you that were praying for us, thank you for praying for us. I use this video to just kind of touch back on the Sunday morning service at Emmanuel. And there's a lot to share with you today. We had a very special day at our church, and we weren't able to stream most of it. And so if you watch the live stream, then this video might fill in some of the gaps. It's the end today of our Emanuel Global month. Emanuel Global, 5 weeks this month, we actually focused on our work around the world that we're trying to do in obedience to the Great Commission. And so we focus on local partnerships. Those are gospel-centered organizations doing gospel work locally. Second week was church planting regionally across the country. We're talking about churches we have planted, churches we are cooperating to plant, and so many great stories. Then week 3, we talked about foreign missions, and we talked about over 55 or 60 partnerships that we have with missionaries and organizations that are doing gospel work, church planting work around the world, bringing people to Jesus. And then week 4, last week we talked about media, which is this channel and other aspects of our media ministry that is reaching thousands of people, and we're thankful for that. And then today was what we called our capstone service, because there were 5 weeks this month. This was our opportunity to just kind of wrap up the whole month, and what God did was remarkable. I had planned to be further ahead in Revelation, but I ended up splitting chapter 1 in half, and then only getting to the first church of Ephesus a couple weeks ago. And so by God's providence, we landed today where we just began to introduce the idea of the persecuted church, the suffering church, the church of Smyrna, Revelation 2, beginning in verse 8. But the thing that's ironic and providential about it is I didn't plan for that to be this Sunday, but that's just the way it timed out. When a year ago, I was with a friend who leads Biblical Ministries Worldwide, BMW, Biblical Ministries Worldwide, Andrew Bunnell, a great friend and a longtime partner in missions work. And he said to me, Cary, Emmanuel helped us get people out of Afghanistan. And I said, yeah, we were praying and we were giving. And he said, no, but you don't realize. He said, I was with your church the weekend that all happened. And he said, there's a very unique connection to Emmanuel. And he said, and the special ops guy that helped us is from Connecticut. And wouldn't it be cool to get all the people that participated in the rescue operation together at Emmanuel for a weekend? And I said, are you serious? And he said, yeah. And I said, Andrew, that would be amazing. And so I can't give you all the names, and we needed to not stream this part of our service because the story is too risky. There are Afghan people that were in our church service today, pastors, Christians, who escaped from the country, whose names were on the list for the Taliban to kill them before they could get out of the country. There were people, special ops, and then others that coordinated the effort that were in our service today. We brought a wonderful group of people together today at Emmanuel, and God allowed it to happen. There were a couple that weren't able to come, but we had Andrew, who leads the missions organization. We had a lady that works with the compassion arm of this mission organization that helped coordinate communications between the people they were rescuing, the diplomats helping to facilitate the rescue, and the special ops teams on the ground doing the rescue. And then we had the leader of the team that was executing the special operations in bringing people out of Afghanistan. And then we had a British diplomat with us today named Charles, who was instrumental as a believer in London in coordinating with U.S. officials and the boots on the ground with our special ops teams, and there was a mutual contact. And so here's the story. Oh, and then we had an Afghan pastor and his son and his wife and their children, and this man, the day that Kabul fell, he was being chased by the Taliban, and he had to relocate 7 or 8 different times in a 24-hour period because they had him on their list. They were hunting him like game and wanted to kill him and his family. And he was with 22 family members and Christians that he had reached there in Afghanistan. But the story begins in 2002, shortly after the 9/11 incident, the Taliban of that era and the American invasion into Afghanistan. There were some refugees that made their way to Russia, fleeing the Taliban. My friend Andrew had just started his missions work in Russia at the time. He was a young man and a newlywed in his early 20s. And at 3 a.m. one morning, he gets a phone call from somebody with the Red Cross, a Christian lady, who called him and said, "We are working with Afghan refugees. We have some men that we would like you to help. And we just need," this is like 3 a.m. And she said, "Would you be willing to meet with them?" Well, as Andrew tells the story, this was a risky proposition because at the time the fear levels were high, terrorism was strong, and Americans were targets. And so he just, at 3 in the morning, he was really not of a mind to take this opportunity. He was suspicious of the call. The Russians were bugging their lines and following them. And there was always, being an American in Russia, St. Petersburg at the time was risky. Now there's a Taliban, Afghan, terrorist, possible connection component at work here. And he was about to decline and say, "No, I'm not the guy that's going to help with this." Young man, young family, all that. And the lady began to cry on the phone, and she said, "Please just help me." She said, "You're the 7th missionary that I've called. Everyone keeps forwarding me to somebody else, and I can't find a missionary that will help me." He said at that point he felt convicted, and he agreed to meet these men. He laughingly says, at McDonald's. So they met at McDonald's. He said he bought them all Big Macs. They'd never eaten a Big Mac before, so they all disassembled their Big Macs, rolled them up, and ate them like wraps, which is what they would have done in Afghanistan. He said, as the story unfolds, he was able to lead the 2 men he met with. He was able to lead them to Christ and build a friendship and disciple them and build a long relationship with them. Turns out that God took him to Russia, not only to minister to Russians, but to minister to former Muslims, Afghan refugees who had gone to Russia. And over the next 6 or 8 years, they had a small community of 80 or 90 new believers that Andrew and his team won to Christ, baptized, and discipled. And of them, one of them, he ordained and trained to be a pastor. Well, in 2009, they finally were able to make some breakthroughs and migrate some of these people to America. But the man that he ordained as a pastor chose not to come to America. He chose to return to Afghanistan to plant churches. He got a job in the government and working with the UN, NATO. But that was a cover for his real call, was to plant churches in Afghanistan. So he began to preach the gospel, win believers, baptize believers, and establish churches in Afghanistan. So fast forward now to 2021, August, when the U.S. is pulling out, Kabul is falling, the Taliban is resurging. This man is the pastor of a group of 80 or 90 people now that he has won and discipled and led forward as a church. And he is on the hit list for the Taliban, and they're trying to flee. They're trying to get out of the country. He texts my friend Andrew, who is now leading Biblical Ministries Worldwide out of Atlanta, and he said, "We're stuck outside the Kabul airport. We can't get through the gate. There are thousands and thousands of people. The Taliban is chasing me. They want to kill me and my family. Can you help us?" Well, that gave way to a 4-day sleepless series of passionate connections. Andrew and his family pursuing every angle they could with every government official, State Department, Senate, Congress, everybody they could get, and they just kept hitting dead ends. And they finally had a moment where they thought they were going to see their way through on a Saturday night, that they said to the group, "Get them to the gate." The password is Geronimo. Get them to the gate. Teaching in Afghan how to say Geronimo was a challenge. But there was a shift change in the Marines that were monitoring the gate, and the ones going off shift didn't tell the new ones coming in about the group and the password. And so when the group got to the gate and used the password, nothing happened. So they frantically texted Andrew and said, "We're here, but nothing's happening." And at that moment, Andrew got a phone call from this representative, this Christian man in London, who is very well connected and who was at our church today. And he said, "I think I have a number of a man on the ground that will help us. Can you forward this to someone, to the senator we're communicating with?" So Andrew was about to forward this number to the senator, and he realized, wait a minute, he's been trying to go through government lines of communication for 4 days and had no breakthrough. So just on a whim and maybe the spurring of God, on Saturday night, he tapped the WhatsApp number and called this man, who answered the phone to his surprise. And in the background was plane engines. And he said, "Let me step away from the airplanes." And then he said, "Sir, how can I help you?" And he said, "Who am I talking to?" And the man told him, "I'm a special ops person here on the ground. I'm at Kabul airport right now." And Andrew said, "Well, I have 22 Afghan Christians and a pastor that are trying to get out of the country. And can you help me?" And he said, "Yes, we can." He said, "We are running covert operations. I think I already know about your group. Tell them to go home. The streets are dangerous. Tell them not to wait outside by the gate." He said, "Tell them to go have some tea and stay in their homes, and we are working a plan to come get them." He said, "My men need to sleep. They've been out on multiple runs, and we're going to go back out." Andrew said, "What do you need?" He said, "I need names and locations, and I need 2 cell numbers in case one of them gets killed." He said, "I get you the names. How do you want the locations?" He's thinking security, and the special ops man said, "Just drop a pin on Google Maps and text that to me, and that's where we'll get them." And so the special ops team slept. Sunday morning rolls around, and they go out to get these 22 people. At the same time, Emmanuel, as a church, that morning, because Andrew had been with us the day before, and the day before that at a staff development event, when Kabul was falling, he was teaching for us, and he was having these phone calls and these messaging and working on this rescue while we were having our staff development time. And so when he left, he told me, "Please pray." And then he told me on Sunday, well, before Sunday, he said, please ask the church to pray. So Sunday morning at about 11:05, or maybe a little before 11, after our worship time, I told the church family, right now a friend of mine is coordinating with a special ops team to rescue 22 Christians in Afghanistan, and we need to pray. And I told the story of Acts 12, the church praying when Peter was in jail. And so we paused the service and we prayed. And I said to the church, I know we feel a million miles away and like we can do nothing, and like prayer isn't going to make a difference, but we believe prayer does make a difference. Acts 12 teaches us it makes a difference. So let's pray. We prayed. What I then found out, actually yesterday and today, was at the very moment we're praying, this team was getting those 22 people. And at 11:10 on Sunday morning, Andrew received a voicemail from the pastor saying, all 22 of us are inside the gate, inside the airport, and we're going to be put on a plane for Abu Dhabi later. We're safe. We're here. Thank you. So we were able to share with our church today how that prayer 2 years ago made a difference. And today that pastor and his family were in our service. And the special ops leader, who is from Connecticut, was in our service. And the man from London and his family that coordinated these things was in our service. And Andrew and his team were in our service. And we were able to thank the leader of the special ops team. He told me at lunch just now, they rescued thousands of people in their nighttime runs over the course of several days. And as the last plane pulled out, then these other teams continued to work through Glenn Beck and the flights that he raised money for. At the end of the day, they saved additionally another 16,000 This friend from London just told me that they're actually still working on getting people out of some of these dangerous situations. And some of these groups that I'm talking about are even active right now in Gaza and in Israel. So then, after we told this story, thanked this special ops leader, brought all these people together, and shared this with the church, we were able to read and really not explore very long, but that's for 2 weeks from now, the church at Smyrna. So we talked about Ephesus, the church that left its first love, and now the church at Smyrna, who is one of two churches that did not receive a rebuke from Jesus, but the only church that Jesus talked about suffering. This is the suffering. This is the persecuted church. And I shared two questions with our church family as we heard the story and as we had in our presence. And I failed to mention that the lady who coordinated many of these rescues, her brother was a church planter in Baghdad, Iraq, and served there for several years. And last year, next week, 1 year ago next week, he was assassinated and martyred for his faith, planting churches, leading people to Christ, winning believers in Baghdad. And she was in our service today. And that man's name is Stephen Trell, Troell. You can actually look him up in the news feed, and you'll see the story of his murder. Tragic loss. But I shared with the church that Jesus told the suffering church to fear not those things that they would suffer. And that he said, you'll be put in prison, you'll be tried, you'll be even maybe put to death. But he said, be faithful to death. Why? Because I'm the one that's the first and the last. I'm the one that was dead and alive, and I'm going to give you the crown of life. I'm the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. So Jesus says to the suffering church, to those that are at risk, don't fear death. Don't fear the loss of your life. Don't fear the suffering, because it's just for a short season, and then you have another life. And he says at the end of the section in Revelation 2, the second death will have no power over you. Now, I don't know how this is hitting you, but I'm deeply convicted by the priorities of the suffering and the persecuted church around the world. I shared some statistics with our church family today. 2021 Christianity Today profiled the top 50 countries where Christianity is dangerous. 12 of them are listed as having extreme levels of persecution. 38 have very high levels of persecution. By conservative numbers, in the last 2 years, over 10,000 believers have been executed simply for their faith in Jesus Christ. 2,100 churches were attacked last year. 5,542 Christians were detained last year. In Nigeria, Christians are being murdered right now on a regular basis. In China, they're being jailed and persecuted on a regular basis. Last year, almost 4,000 churches were closed forcibly. The year before that, the same. So that's more than 10,000 churches in the last 2 years forcibly closed by persecution and oppression. 360 million professing followers of Jesus around the world, that's 1 in 7 believers, face extreme or high levels of persecution for their faith. Some of them were in our service today. So I challenged our church and I said, how do you value church? How do you value the mission of Jesus? How do you value your faith? And I said, if the persecuted church will do what they've done with their suffering, what will we do with our freedom, with our liberty? If they will do what they've done for the Lord with their poverty and in their poverty, what will we do with our prosperity and our liberty? And I said to the church, to whom much is given, much is required. When I'm with these people and I think of the journey they've taken and the persecution they've faced, the losses that they've endured, and the love that they have for Jesus, I'm deeply convicted about priorities, about values, how quickly the fainting and trivial pursuits of our lives and the valueless priorities of our lives fall away to the call of Jesus, to the call of the gospel, and to the value of not just saving a life to live on longer and then eventually die, but actually saving a soul and bringing a soul into eternal life. And that is, as a church and as believers, that is why we give. That is why I tithe, and more than tithe, and I give to missions and I invest. That is why so many have joined us in the effort here in New England to reach believers, disciple believers, plant churches, send missionaries, and partner with gospel preaching and gospel expanding kingdom initiatives, because we take these things seriously. And we've been given much, at least where I am. I don't have to suffer much for my faith. So I want to be a really good steward of my freedom and my liberty and my opportunities. I want to be a good steward of my resources and the time that I have and the energy and the health that God's given me. And I hope you do too. So at the end of the service, I shared the story of the martyrdom of Polycarp, and I'm going to share that tomorrow in the devotion. So I hope you'll join me for that. And then we baptized new believers, and I think we had 8 or 9 new believers that followed Jesus today in baptism. And it was a day of celebration. And then we took all of our special guests to lunch where they could hug and take photos together, people that had saved each other's lives but had really not met all together. And to see this reunion facilitated by our church was just a joy to see, and just a taste of heaven. I don't know how this video finds you, maybe what discouragement or what suffering you're enduring, but be encouraged, my friend, because Jesus says he's the first and the last. He's written the end of the story already, and if your faith is in him, your story is in good hands, and you have a happy ending to your story. You have a great life to live. You have a very bright and a happy future. And so thank you for praying for Emmanuel Baptist Church as we try to shine the light bright in New England. You can believe we face our own form of spiritual darkness and battle, and in some ways oppression, and yet resist the devil and he will flee from you. So I hope you are encouraged today. I am praying for you. Thank you for joining me for a few moments, and I'll see you tomorrow.